Welcome to Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax.
Hey everybody, welcome to an all-new episode of Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois' property tax with Nora Devine. I'm your host, Mike Leon. You know, Nora has been a property tax attorney in private practice since 2005, and she's developed a statewide practice in all jurisdictions in Illinois, representing all property classes. So today we're going to be digging into the question that surprises a lot of property owners, and that's, can fixing your home or building raise your property taxes? Renovations, big or small, they can always trigger reassessments. So here's what you need to know before construction. So Nora, thanks for hopping on here. And let's ask the high level question. When someone pulls a permit for construction or remodeling, does that automatically trigger a reassessment of the property?
Like all the things in the law, it depends. It depends what jurisdiction you're in, and it depends the timing of when you pull the permit. If you're in Cook County and you pull a permit, those permits are still really behind in terms of the government processing the permits. There's major differences now compared to 5-10 years ago about how many permits the government is able to process, how many they're able to analyze, inspect, close out. So right now, you know, there used to be 120 people working in the field department. Those were the actual individuals that would put their boots on the ground and go see a new property when a permit was pulled. The last I heard, there was 12. I'm sure there may be some more hires now because I think they've been trying to hire for that office, I hope, for that department. But the fact remains that they're still very behind on closing out permits inside of Cook County. So they do get looked at eventually. The ones that have the most impact on the assessed value of a property, which is the thing that mostly impacts the tax bill, is if you add square footage. So if you had some part of the building that wasn't finished living area before and you change it to finished living area, say you finish a basement, you make it into living area. Say you finish an attic, you make it into living area. Say you put a coach house over your garage, or say you put an addition on the back of your building. All these things are adding living area. And when you make an adjustment to the above ground living area, that's when you see the largest impact on the assessed value, which is the main factor in how big your property tax bill is.
So Lauren, let me ask you then, how do assessors typically get their information about these renovations? Is it just from permits, or are there other data sources that they're using?
Inside Cook County, they're typically getting it from people pulling permits, and depending on which municipality you're in, there may be high permit compliance or there may be very low permit compliance. There may be areas of Cook County where you can build a whole house and maybe nobody would notice in some of the unincorporated areas, or they might not notice right away. And there's places in heavily incorporated areas where new houses have been built and the homes are still being assessed pursuant to their classifications that they had before the old home was torn down. So outside of Cook County, it's a totally different ballgame. They are more resourced, every single office. There are more assessors out there. In one single county, you may have up to 24 local township assessors. And these people are very in tune with what's going on with the properties in their jurisdiction. They're getting permits and they're analyzing them and they're inspecting the properties and they're closing those permits out, but they're also just driving around their neighborhood every day. So there are times that the assessing official may know more about the property than even your own client does, or certainly more than I do. So when I'm heading out to a hearing in a Collier County area, whether it's commercial or residential, I leave early enough so that I can drive by the property, because one of the most powerful things you can say in a hearing is, I was there. And outside of Cook County, 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, the assessing official is going to be able to say, I was there, because they live right down the street in most cases. So it's a totally different level of keeping up with the property characteristics outside of Cook County versus inside of Cook County. And that has to do with jurisdictional size, as well as how well resourced the offices are and how much technology they're using and how successful they are at using technology, and as well as how good is the data that they already have. If you have a lot of data integrity in your mass appraisal system, then incorporating new facts is pretty easy to do. And when your data is way behind and it's not that accurate, and it's woefully inaccurate in some jurisdictions that we know of, then it's a much harder process to collect new data and to make it make sense.
Who knew driving around, getting to know your community, right? I mean, it's such an easy thing. So let me ask you, because maybe there's a misconception here, but what kind of improvements are most likely to increase a property's assessed value? Is it things like kitchens or decks, or are there upgrades that don't even impact taxes?
A deck, maybe. Kitchen, maybe not. Mostly it's adding square footage. That's the number one thing you can do. There is something in Illinois called the home improvement exemption, which means that whatever you do to improve your property, up to 75,000 in market value is not going to be taxed for the first 4 years. And that's an exemption that's automatically implemented by the assessing officials theoretically, and most of the time it is. And then after 4 years, it does sunset off. So you do get that break if you make some improvements. And then it's important to know that just basic maintenance of your property, making sure that the roof is replaced when it's time, making sure the windows are replaced when it's time. That's the kind of thing that is not supposed to increase your assessed value, because, basically maintaining your house, the public should be incentivized to do that. And we don't want to disincentivize them from maintaining their homes by penalizing them through the property tax code. And conversely, I have clients that come to me and say, well, my property's terribly maintained and I've never replaced the roof, and I have, the windows don't even work as windows and things like that. And those are hard cases to make too, because you can't then go to the assessing officials and say, my failure to maintain my property should result in a reduction in property value, when the converse is disallowed. You're not allowed to increase their assessed value just because they have done several of the maintenance items that needed to be done. So basic maintenance items is not what they're looking for, theoretically, and we hope. Mostly they're looking for additional square footage, additional features. Did they add a deck? Did they add some paving? Did they add a freestanding garage? Did they add a pool? And the pool is another subject of conversation, because in our area, if you look at paired sale analysis of houses that sell with a pool versus houses that don't have a pool, you come to the conclusion that the pool may or may not enhance the market value of a home in this area. A significant percentage of people who buy a home in the Midwest, actually the first thing they do is fill it in. So it just does depend on what exactly you've done as far as whether or not it is a positive impact on value.
That is interesting. Can you give a little bit? We've talked a little bit on the residential front. Can you give a little bit of the difference in with respect to residential and commercial renovations and how those are treated by assessors in the state of Illinois?
Commercial is a whole different ballgame. You usually talk about trade dress improvements when you're talking about commercial, when, especially in a retail situation, if it's a big retailer and they have a property and it is operated in a certain way and it looks a certain way and it's laid out a certain way and the dock doors are a certain way, then if a new retail operator comes in, they're going to make significant changes to all of the above, because their trade dress is just going to be different than what the old retailer was doing. So you can have these enormous permits that are pulled for, say, car dealerships or big box retailers or other types of businesses that have a client facing or customer facing trade dress on the street. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the assessed value should be increased in a way that is commensurate with the permit that was pulled. In assessing, we say cost does not necessarily equal value, which means you could put an enormous amount of expense into changing a property in a way that nobody in the market will value other than the person who is changing the property for their own use. In Illinois, unlike other jurisdictions, we are a value in exchange state, not a value in use state. So the assessing officials are supposed to assess the property based upon what somebody would pay for it if it were available for sale on the open market. In the case of improvements that are done to commercial properties, many times those improvements are extremely specific to the user that is making the improvement. And the market, in a broad sense, is not going to value those changes. So therefore, cost does not equal value in the case of a lot of commercial improvements.
So Nora, I forgot to ask you, because you mentioned about commercial properties versus residential, but what about industrial properties? Can you expand a little bit on those owners?
Oh yeah, I'm so glad you asked. Inside of Cook County, the vast majority of industrial property owners rely upon incentives in order to make it make sense to stay in Cook County, due to the differences between how Cook County assesses industrial property and all property compared to how the properties are assessed outside of Cook County. There are incentives that are codified in our ordinances, our county ordinances, that give steep tax relief to industrial users in particular, and in some communities, also commercial users. So before you add on to a commercial building, you would absolutely want to talk to a property tax attorney to screen that project to make sure that it's not eligible for some kind of an incentive. Because once you've broken ground, it's actually too late to pursue it. So this is something you have to be proactive about.
Nora, let me ask you, can you walk us through how the timing of a renovation matters for the assessment cycle? Like when do these charges actually show up on the tax bill?
In Illinois, we pay our taxes in arrears, so we're paying them 1 year late already. Right now, we are in the process of appealing the assessed values for 2025. As we record this, it's August of 2025 right now. So what'll happen with the results that we get from the assessments that we're appealing is those assessments will then impact the taxes that are due and payable in 2026. So there's already that 1 year lag in terms of when an increase happens and when a taxpayer actually feels the increase in Illinois. And that can be further impacted by the timing of pulling a permit. In Cook County, they reassess every 3 years. And if you pull the permit right before a reassessment year, chances are decent, or at least higher, that you would have the permit affect the property assessment in the first year of the triennial. Whereas if you pulled that permit after the first year of the triennial, after the assessments were published, then chances are decent that the improvement may be not recognized until the following triennial assessment year. So pulling the permit can have an impact on when you will see the increase, depending on where we are in the assessment cycle. It's the same is true with purchases or transfers.
Nora, are there ways right now that property owners that are listening to this, maybe they can minimize the risk of an overassessment? Is there something like with respect to documenting the purpose of the renovation or showing that it doesn't increase, the income potential of square footage like you mentioned before? What would you recommend to them?
I think it's good to get advice before you pull a permit to improve a commercial property. Sometimes when you're adding certain features, they can be classified in certain ways to not add square footage. Say certain types of mezzanines may not increase the overall building square footage. And if you are improving a residential property, I would say there's a range of permit expenses that you could disclose, right? The builder doesn't give you an exact estimate. They give you a range. They say, oh, this project might cost this or that. I think it's ethical to disclose the low end of the estimated range that the contractor gave you for the improvements that you're trying to make. We as lawyers can't advise people to, do work without a permit or to disclose the wrong amounts on a permit application or anything like that, but that oftentimes will be a starting point for the assessing officials when you write that number on that permit.
Well, Nora, you just fed into the follow-up, because what happens if someone renovates without a permit? Can this still affect their property taxes? And then how do the assessors kind of find out when those happen?
In Cook County, I would say it's not likely that they'll find out unless we're talking about a permit for a new build or something like that. Outside of Cook County, they do find out. And a lot of times it's because later on down the road, they try to sell the house and the multiple listing sheet shows a finished basement, and the assessing official says, hey, wait a minute, my property record card doesn't show a finished basement. So then they may put the basement on after that. And also can happen when you're appealing property assessments and you're giving them multiple listing sheets and things like that of comparables that have also sold. And then they're seeing those for the first time. Oh, no basement. Well, actually there is one, or something like that. So they are always on the lookout for how they can make their data better outside of Cook County. Inside of Cook County, it's a little tougher because there's not a lot of permit compliance in some of the municipalities inside of Cook County, and they are understaffed in the field office, in the assessor's office. And the jurisdictional size is a very large barrier to keeping the data accurate. So 1.8 million pins for one person to assess is probably too many, and it's not seen elsewhere in the country.
Nora, you mentioned the word appeals there. So let me ask you, how do appeals work when someone believes their renovation was overhauled or maybe overvalued, not overhauled, they overhauled it, or incorrectly assessed? Like what kind of evidence is most helpful for them in that appeal process?
For the commercial property owner who is fighting an increase based on a large permit value that was disclosed. The best evidence is appraisal evidence, and using an appraiser who's very adept at explaining and the difference between fee simple and lease fee sales, as well as what the trade dress permit may mean. So we do have appraisals where you actually have paired sale analysis where the same exact property, if the leasee made a lot of improvements to the trade dress and there is a very nice rental amount being paid by the occupant to the landlord, and then there's another sale, then that's where we see the paired sale analysis between what the building is worth before the trade dress is changed and what it's worth after. And then we can start getting data points on what the value of the lease might be. So if it's vacant and nobody's paying rent, the investors look at it as though it's worth a certain amount of money. And if it's occupied and the tenant is a national credit tenant and they're paying quite a bit of rent, then the second sale, when it's occupied, can show us the detail about what that lease value may be adding to the property value. And in Illinois, we're supposed to be doing the fee simple, which means what would this property be worth if it were vacant and available for sale on the market? So then if that second tenant who has the new trade dress then goes out of business and now they're selling the property again, and that property sells again for similar amount to the first sale, which is what it was before the trade dress was improved, then that's where an appraiser can make the valid argument that this trade dress permit really did not increase the value. It only increased the value for the occupant and the tenant that was using the property at the time. So it does come down to appraisal evidence for commercial users.
So Nora, let's put a bow on this. What somebody's watching this, listen to this. What's your best advice for someone that's about to plan a renovation? They want to stay ahead of any surprises on their property tax bill. What's the best piece of advice you can give them?
I would say talk to the property tax attorney first before you do anything. I would say don't talk to the press about how much money you're putting into the property. We've seen that in the past too, where, a property taxpayer was boastful with the local newspaper and said, oh, this thing cost me $65 million to build. And, the assessing official at the time, this is quite a while ago, said, oh, really? Is that right? And, put it on the assessment roll at that number. And then years and years later, when they were finally able to sell it, it sold for a fraction of what kind of cost they put in. So really the assessment never should have been as high as it was set. But, speaking to the press and being boastful about how much money you spent on something is not a good strategy for keeping your assessment low.
There you go. Words to live by. Nora, thank you so much for the insights and analysis on this. I truly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to everybody out there for listening to today's episode of Devine Intervention. If you're planning a renovation out there, you want to understand how it might impact your tax bill, Nora can help you prepare and protect your investment. Visit thedevinelawgroup.com, DEVINE on Devine to learn more. And don't forget to like, subscribe, share this episode if you feel like it'll help somebody out there. As always, I'm Mike Leon. See everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.